Hey everyone. So my name is Mark Theriault. I'm from Vancouver, British Columbia. I'm currently an effects lead at Image Engine. I've been doing visual effects for over 10 years. I started in commercials and kind of have dabbled in video game cinematics, feature film, and feature animation. I'm really excited to be here actually because the concept of the masterclass is a fascinating thing. If you're not in production yet, and if you're a student, a lot of these topics and the things that people talk about are usually done over lunch or over beers during the day. And so it kind of never leaves the studio space. So one of the things I wanted to do is bring something that's always been kind of touched on in a production standpoint, but not really pushed out in an education standpoint. So I brought a topic called complexity versus simplicity. You might be looking at the topic and seeing the verses and be thinking to yourself, well, this is going to be a discussion about complexity is better than simplicity. Making things complex and over-complex is the best idea, but no, simplicity is the best. And it's kind of not that actually at all. It's about the relationship of complexity and simplicity coming together in a production standpoint. It's a very fascinating topic for me because in a leadership role, I see a lot of students come out of school and their first thought is, I want to make the biggest, baddest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And they tend to over-engineer things. So I really wanted to bring this topic and kind of like walk people through it. So the first thing I'm going to call up is this rose. It's a very simple illustration, and we've had some amazing, fascinating artists here that walk you through this process while you see it on the screen. On the left, you have a blocking pass. You're just basically laying out what the rose is. You're popping something off the surface of the canvas. You're trying to build something. You're trying to build a foundation that you can move on top of. But you're not really getting into the details. You're not really finessing any of the stuff on the right side of the screen, right? But you know that it's not the final product that you want. But in order to get there, you're going to have to go through a middleman, which is you're going to have to start to add complexity. You're going to have to start to build off of that base level. And you're going to have to try and add things like a little bit of shaping, a little bit of shadowing, a little bit of that extra detail that kind of brings it off of a foundation. And then once you get the note from the client that says, good start, keep going, then you have to kind of add on the rest of it, which is you add on the petals. You start to bring out the shaping of the specular, and you got to maybe put it into an environment. You add that extra layer of complexity. Because the reality is when you see like brilliant artists like Mark, they don't go in and be like, I'm going to draw a dragon in 30 minutes and pop it up and be like, okay, I'm going to draw this amazing eyeball and just sit on that eyeball for 30 minutes. They don't do that. They flesh it out first. And so I always tend to send this image to the new hires that start in effects. Because while traditional artists, this is nothing. This is like, well, duh. To a lot of artists in the CG industry, this is very, very rare. It's a concept that's not really ingrained. Because we teach the tool and we show these final images of like, this amazing stuff, and you're like, this is what you can do. And everyone's like, I want to do that, but they don't remember or think about the fact that you have to build up a lot to get there. It's very common in modeling. You go from block modeling, you build up, you get to your frog. It's super useful in animation, obviously. So I went to school for film and have a background in traditional animation. And so the X sheet, the dope sheet, is kind of your base level, and you build off of that. You add your frames and your in-betweens, and you build the complexity. Lighting, you set your keys and your rims. You don't jump right into GI right away. You build it up. And why is this idea important to effects? So, like I said, with an effects background, it's kind of interesting because you have these two types of mentalities. You have half of the room that are artists that went to school that threw paint against a wall and did things in art school that were weird and otherworldly, and then you have literally people who went to MIT for computer science. So you have these two interesting brains in one singular department that have to coalesce, and they think completely differently. And what tends to happen is when people come in, they overcomplicate everything. Because they think, oh, I want to make, like I said, the coolest, the biggest thing ever. And a lot of times that's not the best route to go. Because at the end of the day, there's two things that you kind of have to remember. In visual effects, you're fighting with your own personal needs, but also production's needs. So while you're going to want to create this image, production's going to want you to create this image extremely quickly. So you're going to have to fit that in. Also, the longer I do this, the more I've come to realize that VFX are getting absolutely more and more complex, which requires that end goal of being complex. And it's also getting tighter and tighter deadlines. And these ideas aren't things that they teach at school. Yeah, you have a date for a project, but you don't have your entire career riding on a Friday at 6 p.m. And that can come over your head quickly, and that can suffocate you. And schools don't tend to teach this idea of how to be a production artist. There's a vast difference between being an artist, a conceptual artist in school, and drawing things, and being able to draw things professionally while getting paid for it and still delivering on time. And it's extremely important, I think, that schools kind of dabble into this market because there's a balance. At the top of this pyramid, you'll see time and budget. That is God in visual effects. You can take the greatest concept artist here and ask him what the most difficult thing at work is, and he will say the time and the budget. Because that dictates everything you do as an artist. And so you have to look at how you work and how you manage your art. And you have to look at the time and budget and look at the simplicity of the shot or the complexity of the shot and try and hit the sweet spot of the middle. And I'm going to try and illustrate a couple of ideas to help you hit that sweet spot depending upon where you're at in production. So over the years, I've kind of delineated it down to 4 different workflows. I think it kind of falls under these 4 topics. The first one is simple and basic. Just get it done. Just get the shot done. The second one is complicated and basic, and the title of this one's We've All Been There, and what that means is we've all made the mistake before. We've all gone down this road, and it's an interesting and complicated road, actually. The third one is simple and advanced, and it's basically harping back to the rows that I showed in the beginning. It's moving simple and trying to create something that's complex at the end. And then the fourth one is when the juice is worth the squeeze, and this is when you have to actually just go in and build something astronomically complex. You just can't get around it. So the first one is simple and basic. So this clip is a 2-clip clip. And what it is when I was at Frantic Films, I was leading a movie called Tooth Fairy. And we had 80 shots of fairy dust. It was a lot of work, a lot of simulation data. We had tons of particle data sitting on a computer. We finished the film, and instantly, and this is something you'll learn, you'll instantly roll over to another film that's in 911 crunch mode, almost every time. And I went instantly onto G.I. Joe. And I got launched on a plasma cannon. And they came to me and they said, you have 3 weeks to develop this thing. We have no idea what it's going to look like. You have 3 weeks to develop it, execute it, get it to comp, and get it done. And I was like, oh my God, that's no time at all. Shit, what do I do? So I went and I was like, wait a minute, I have like terabytes of simulation data from Tooth Fairy. I have all these plasma cannons, these weird simulation data. I don't need scenes. So what I did was I took the simulation data from Tooth Fairy and I placed it onto the muzzle in G.I. Joe. I squashed it, I stretched it, I animated it, I timed it, I just did luma keys, I just made it work. I just used it as stock elements and created an entirely different effect that required 0 setup time. It was built, edited, shot, and everything was done within 3 weeks, and I was going home at 6 p.m. I didn't have to build anything. I didn't have to set up anything. I just got the shot done. I didn't want to try and reinvent the wheel. The second one that I'm going to show is from when I was at Blur Studios. I had this shot, which is this guy getting thrown into the staircase. When I first was launched on this shot, my mind instantly went to, okay, I'm going to do this rigid body simulation. I'm going to have him hit, and then I'm going to have like the shards shoot out and reflect off his helmet and all this like crazy stuff. And then I looked at it and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to animate it. So I just hand keyed all the boards, made it work, and just finished the shot. I just got it done. I didn't go in and simulate because I knew at the end of the day, if you had a guy slamming into a staircase at that speed, at that angle between two planks, good luck getting a simulation to be controlled. You'll spend 3 weeks just trying to get a first pass out. And I didn't have the time or the budget to be able to do that. So I just went in and hand keyed it all and got the shot done. So what can you do under this topic? Look to reuse. If somebody else is doing an effect in the same department that you're in, don't try and be a hero and be the guy that creates a better setup. Like, just see what he's doing. See if you can reuse it. If you've already done a setup on another show, try and reuse that. I'm telling you, every time I work on a film, we're always redoing sparks. We're always redoing smoke sims that like should be just library. So look to reuse. Try and build a library of your own that you can call back on shots, because then you'll get done with it quicker. Don't reinvent the wheel. If you've already created a spark setup that works, don't be like, oh, I want to try that again. You're wasting time. And try and keep it simple and fast. As an effects artist, there's also a workload of computer work above your head. I have a 16-core 96 gig computer at work, and I'm constantly crashing the thing. I'm constantly killing it. And so you have to extrapolate that out over a whole render farm. If you're taking like 10 minutes a frame to do a smoke sim, you should probably kill it, because it's way too slow and you're not actually going to get the results that you want and or need from that smoke sim. And the other thing to think about is, like, do you need to even do it in simulation? The other fun story that I heard was at DreamWorks Animation. A guy was launched on a tree that gets like hit and these shards flew out. And he was like, you know what? I'm just going to draw it in Nuke. So he just opened up a Nuke comp and drew on the frames in Final within like 2 days. And then the other thing is, does it even need to be done in the effects department? Everyone wants to kind of take ownership of the stuff that they do, and that's awesome. And what I'm trying to explain here is that sometimes shots just need to get done so you can work on the cooler, bigger thing that you need to have time to work on. But there's also situations where maybe a comp element might work. I always emphasize effects artists to learn compositing as well. Because if you can get a composite element into the comp and show it and say, hey, you know, we have this 1,000-shot library of little smoke poofs. Why don't we just put one there? Look at how it would look. 9 times out of 10, they'll go, great, cool, done. And you'll get to go back onto the bigger effect that you really want to actually spend the time on, instead of these small iterative processes that take up the majority of your time. And then there's complicated and basic. And so this is kind of a catch-22 topic. This is one where I see it all the time. This is when a rabbit hole is explored and it just goes deep. So this was an effect that I did at DreamWorks Animation. This is an extremely simple looking effect. At the end of the day, that should have probably just been a noise modifier. But I went crazy. I did a massive simulation. That thing is fluid simmed, it's whipped cream, it was crazy to control. I had to build this unbelievable rig. It took me 6 weeks to do this shot. Exactly. Everyone's like, that's ridiculous. Come on. I got to explore a little bit of the art side and add a little bit of the peak at the end and kind of explore it as a character. But really, at the end of the day, what what it should have been is like a 1 week noise modifier, just rippled and called it a day. But I had the time and the budget to just kind of explore it, so I explored it. I ran that rabbit hole. It wasn't the best of ideas, but it happens. The second one is a callback from the first. So I talked about the Warcraft one where I looked at the shot and I instantly went, oh, I'm just going to hand key that. This is the opposite. So I was at DreamWorks and I was launched on this shot. And they were like, we need the plane to collapse. I spent like 2 weeks trying to get a simulation to have character. Because one of the things at DreamWorks is you're doing effects, but you're also kind of building character. So you want to have kind of an interesting timing to things. It's got the squash and stretch kind of idea. And in simulation, that's really difficult to kind of bring through. And I was struggling. I was really struggling. And DreamWorks is a place where you sit in a cubicle, so you're kind of isolated in your own world. And I didn't realize that I was going into this complicated and basic rabbit hole. And I was at lunch, and I was sitting with the animator who was doing the animation actually on the line. And I was like, sorry, man, I haven't hit this, I just can't get this plane to work. And he's like, why don't you just hand key it? And I was like, oh, fucking, are you serious? Why didn't I think of that? I didn't even think of it. So I went back, and I actually animated it all in Maya. Everything is hand keyed. There's not a single ounce of simulation in this. So while it was complicated and basic in the beginning, it kind of shifted into simple and basic because I was able to course correct. So don't try and start at the end. Don't try and look at things and be like, I'm going to try and make it the most complicated thing in the world. Try and build it up a little bit more. And don't be ashamed to admit defeat. One of the things I always see with new artists is they'll get to a point in their scenes and in their simulations where they just can't get it to work. They're fighting the software. And 9 times out of 10, if you just delete your entire scene and start over, I guarantee you will be done quicker than if you just keep adding another node in Houdini and you just keep building it up. It's going to bring so much more diminishing results if you keep that way. And if you're waiting on long simulation times, render or comp turnarounds, make sure it's absolutely necessary. Because in effects, what's interesting is we have simulation times, which is basically we just throw this idea into the ether and then hope in 6 to 10 hours something comes back that we expect. And it's all theory. And so the best way to work is try and have quick simulation iterations. So you can just chuck things on the farm, just boom, 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 boom. Okay, that looks good. Let's work up that one. And the other thing to note is if you're unsure of where you are, like I was with that stuff, just ask the person to your left. Hey man, I'm trying to do this Spark Sim or whatever, and it's just not working. Do you have any ideas? And he'll probably roll over and be like, this is ridiculously complicated, man. You can just do it with 2 nodes. So ask. The third one is simple and advanced. Now, this one is directly related to the rose image. So this is taking a shot and working it through from the basis. So the first clip I'm going to show is this planet explosion that I did at Blur. So I did this explosion at Blur, and I had 3 weeks to do it, and all I had was an image of a planet. So I went massively complicated. Fun fact, the best place to sleep at Blur is behind the big screen TV. They have a little futon back there. I stayed at the studio. I worked 90 hours for 3 weeks. I just killed myself on this image. And we sent it to the client, and the client was like, that's cool, but could we have it implode? Oh, are you kidding me? So I just got to this point where I just was told, okay, cool, throw it all away and start over. So luckily I had 3 more weeks to do it again. But now we're really close to having to have a deadline, which means it's called a drop deadline, which is not like it's due in 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. It was like, we have to get it done. There is no rolling over. So I had to go back to the storyboard phase. They wanted a different camera angle, and they wanted the planet to implode and then explode, which from a fundamental effects standpoint is very difficult to do. So I went back to my traditional kind of animation background, and I dope sheeted it, I thumbnailed it, and then this is a process of how I got to the final product. You'll see the telltale signs of that rose image throughout this. So you'll see how I did timings. I just crushed a ball. I just wanted to get a timing based on the camera angle. I just did a little thing to try and get some sort of pacing, some cadence to it. And then just worked up the simulation stuff. And I knew that I didn't have the time to do interpenetrate, like full-on hardcore simulation stuff anymore, so I just did dummy particles. These things intercollide, who gives a shit? Let's just cover it with some particles. And so I just kind of iterated on it, and you can see the process in this, and it's a step process. It was like, okay, the timing of the planet collapsing is good. The ring coming out is good. Okay, let's work on the particle simulation. Let's do the big particles. Then let's do the medium-sized particles. Then let's do the smaller particles. And then they wanted this inner rib cage to collapse, which was like, and then I had to get this inner rib cage to collapse. And then it's me just iterating on that idea, trying to get the timing right. Now they wanted the planet to actually crush in on itself. So you can see how it's just building off of it. Every pass in this is just one step closer, one step further in complexity. But every time it's simple setups. These were all viewport previews. I just ran this locally. None of this was on the network. It was just locally. Because I didn't have time to do any of that stuff. I didn't have the time or the budget. And so I started to break things out into its own individual parts. So I just blew out the center chunks just to get that section timed correctly instead of trying to blow out the whole entire planet. And then I realized, okay, I have to have this thing implode and then explode. How do I do that? And I was like, well, I'll just animate the visibility. So I literally have the planet implode, and then I turn it off, and then turn on the other one on one frame, and it explodes. So it's just simple tweaks like that can, at those moments, pull you through and just get it done. Because I also had to composite it all. So this is all final comp that I had done. So as I was iterating on this, I was also trying to build out the composite and build out the effect. So this is another example at Blur of a shot I did on Iron Man, like a video game show or something like that. I don't know. But it's just an illustration of building things up in complexity, just getting your timing, your cadence right. With explosions in space, a fun note is always just use a ring. I just always, if I ever have like a space explosion, I just always use a ring and try and use that to get the scale of the ring, because then you can base everything around the animation of that ring timing. And again, this is iterating on the comp. So it's building out the assets and then building out the passes and iterating through. So start from simple shapes. Start from the blocking. And get buy off on the blocking as soon as you can. Another pitfall is that a lot of people kind of hoard their stuff until they think it's the best thing that they've ever seen in their life. And that's really not a great way to work, because in visual effects it's a collaboration. And what you think might be the greatest thing in your entire life, the director might be like, cool, keep going. So try and present your work early. Try and just show, hey, this is a blocking pass that I have. What do you think of the timing? Okay, it's cool. Yeah, great. And then move on to the next step. Justify the complexity at every step. And try and hold back from your inner scientist to run wild. And what I mean by that is, like I was saying, is if you come from a computer science background, remember what the end goal of visual effects is. We all have these lofty ideas of being an artist in this industry, and that's fantastic to have. But at the end of the day, you're selling a product. Visual effects is just a product. You're selling an art that in some ways is not your own art. You can add your stamp to the shots. But at the end of the day, you're selling someone else's art. And so understand that and work within the confines of that. If you can push your art forward and make really cool stuff under the umbrella of somebody else's kind of upper level, you'll be able to execute stuff in a way better way. And I've always said that the faster you can get to 80%, the more time you'll have spending on that last 20%, that last little je ne sais quoi, in a sense. So we get it, the rows. We get it. It's a transition from base to detail. But what if you're asked at work, and this is going to happen, to not just create the rows, but do a rose castle? And what I mean by this is not everything is just a single shot. And like I said in the beginning, visual effects is getting more and more complex. We're getting bigger and bigger sequences. Sometimes it's not just one shot, it's 450 shots of the same effect, which is what I'm going to show. So a brilliant effects artist at Image Engine had to do 450 shots on Chappie. Now, if you haven't seen Chappie, Chappie is a fully CG robot. And in the script, there's a little thing about how, he gets these Mr. T chains, which is not a big deal if you think about it from a script writing standpoint. It's like, oh, cool, he wears chains. But he wears chains in 450 shots. So how do you approach this effect? You can't really do the rows. You can't just be like, okay, I'm going to take every shot and work it up. You have to make sure that the complexity is valid. So the clip that I brought is kind of a little bit of a making of. So these are rigid body simulation chains. So he had to build it out in a flexible way that the chains could be run in a procedural manner. So you'll notice that the Chappie slides in and then the chains come on, because that's important. That little detail is actually massively key to this entire effect. And these are complex rigid body simulations. Like his hands are touching that stuff. It's not on like a smooth thing. It's like catching on these little tiny things. It's crazy. This is crazy. This is crazy. Like, people look at things on like Transformers and like, that's explosions. It's like, that shit's simple. This is crazy. So what he did was this. What was so genius about this? He looked at it from a different perspective, and he went, okay, I'm going to try and approach this from not just a shot basis, but a sequence basis. And what he did was he worked with other departments. So how the setup worked is this. He built a Houdini scene that had a rigid body simulation and Chappie at a T-pose. Chappie slid in, had the rigid body chains, and they would drop, rest, and then he would slowly move to his first keyframe, and then he would animate. And then he built the pipeline, so what would happen is an animator would animate Chappie, he would kick off a publish, so he would publish his animation, which would then automatically trigger Houdini to build a scene, run a rigid body simulation, render a movie, shoot a QuickTime, and put it into what's called Shotgun. So one effects artist ended up doing 450 shots. He would come in the morning, animation would be done, they'd do 15 to 20 shots or whatever, and he would have a list of QuickTimes, and he would go, okay, that one worked well, that one worked well, nope, have to go in and tweak that, done. And those would automatically just go to render. They would just go to lighting. He would never even actually open the scene. It would just go. And then the other ones he would have to go in and maybe like tweak per shot basis. But 50% of the shots had no human intervention from the effects department. That's a massive time and budget saving. And it still allowed sculptural artistic merit because there was a lot of shots where Chappie's like holding the chains, which is very difficult to do. So sometimes you just have to go complex in effects. But you have to start to think about things in a larger perspective. So you have to think about things in a shot basis. So if you have something like 450 shots, okay, how do I approach this from them as a totality? How do I look at it and build a rig that works? And when you have to approach rig work, because in effects you will have to build rigs. You won't be building just shots. You'll have to build setups. And you have to look at it and try and front load the work. And what I mean by that is try and put all of the work that you do in the beginning. So then it's just iterative shot running. And try and make shot execution easy. I've had so many times where I've had a shot, I've come into a studio and they're like, okay, you have to run these 5 shots with this tool. And you open the tool and it's like this spreadsheet of just like words. And you're like, oh my God, what does this thing do? What does this thing do? I had a guy at a studio who is an amazing effects artist who built rigs with 3 letters. Everything was like CRB. And you'd be like, what is CRB? What's CRB? And he would have to tell you what CRB is. Make it simple. Make it Apple. Just like make it one button. I tend to like to make my rigs with just a time offset and just a button that says go. Make art. Because then it gives the effects artist the time to iterate on things. Because it's not always just hit a button, run, and you're done. And know when to ask for help. Visual effects and everyone here, even concept artists, you're not an island. I've worked directly with concept artists before. I've actually done work where I'm rendering things and giving it to a concept artist to integrate into the thing. Understand that visual effects is a group, that everyone is not just their own person. So know when to ask for help and work with other departments. So the 4 types of workflows are pretty obvious, and I kind of haven't seen anything that fits into any other category, to be honest. So just to sum things up, is anyone can make something complex. There's that saying where it's like if you put a monkey at a typewriter and give him enough time, he'll write the Bible or something like that. That's super true when it comes to Houdini and a lot of these complex node-based softwares. As people tend to just like throw things at a wall and just see if they work. And they just keep building it up, building it up, building it up. And it's actually quite simple to do that stuff. It takes energy to be efficient. And always try to be mindful of the 4 grids and know when you're in one that production doesn't want you to move into. Because that's key on top of all of this is production. You don't want to be the guy that's like going down this crazy rabbit hole and producers are at you because they will start to get frustrated. They'll be like, where's this shot? Where's this shot? Where's this shot? Where's this shot? And you're like, oh my God. And that kind of doesn't help. So I also like to try and intimately know what the needs of the shot, the production, and the show are. Ask a producer, hey, honestly, how long do I have on this shot? They'll usually be pretty candid. Ask your supervisor, hey, also, how long do I have on this shot? He'll tell you something completely opposite. And try and start simply and add complexity. And add it as necessary. And so I kind of wanted to leave it and end it on a Q&A because it's an interesting topic and I kind of hope people have questions, but maybe people might not. But if anyone has questions, please throw them my way. Anyone? Bueller? Yeah. That's all right. I can hear you.
How do you deal with clients
With clients? Caprice. Oh, with WIP work in progress stuff?
It's about the planet.
Oh, yeah.
You have to explode it,
Mm-hmm.
and you present your work.
Yeah.
And they say,
Yeah.
how do you deal with that?
You have to learn to compartmentalize things. So you have to learn to brace for the impact. And what I mean by that is, everyone is an artist here in any department. And art is an extension of your ego. At the end of the day, that's all it is. And it can be really, really disheartening to get extremely tough client notes and things that break your heart in a way. So a way that you have to manage that is look at it from a grand scheme of things and look at it as like, okay, I'm given these boundaries. I'm being told I have to do something in this way. And change your wants from an artist's perspective. So let's say, for example, like I spent that 3 weeks on that explosion, and then he was like, make it implode. There was a moment in time where I went to the bathroom and contemplated my life, right? Like everyone does that. It's just get it out of your system. Like it's very, very, I've seen so many breakdowns, cry fests from client notes. It happens to everyone. But what you have to do is push through that, because what'll happen is you have to look at it not from a single shot, but from like 3 to 6 shots. Because you might have one shot that's like kicking your ass, but another shot, it's everything that is what you've thought of. You've constructed it as your idea. And try and figure out a way to always make your best art, even if it's not something you agree with, which is tough.
Don't have time
Yeah.
to finish it. How do you protect yourself from what kind of wants at the beginning and what wants?
So that's kind of where you have to look at the 4 grids. One is when you get a shot, think about how you should execute it. So think about like, okay, do I have 3 days to do this shot? I shouldn't probably spend something that I know instinctually will take 20 days, right? And if you start to show blocking passes early, then it's not on you, right? So if you're doing a shot, let's say, with an effect, or a concept art, or even animation, if you're constantly presenting work to internal and getting feedback, and people are seeing that you're actively working on stuff, then it's not on you, it's on production, and it's on the client. And you can only do so much in so little of time, but if you're showing that you're hitting their notes internally and trying to actively get something done, then it's kind of one of those things where you just got to be like, I'm trying my best, we've been iterating through this, and we'll get there. It's a touchy subject. It's a very touchy subject. It's difficult. It takes time. A lot of this stuff takes experience. It takes a lot of experience, because you kind of, the way that I explain it is like, I could go out in Paris today, and I probably walk through a neighborhood that you guys would be like, why are you walking through that? It's horrible. You're going to get beat up. And I would have no clue because I've never been in that neighborhood, right? And that's kind of this idea, is that like, until you've been in one of those 4 quadrants and messed up, it takes difficulty learning from that. So that's kind of why I wanted to show it, is be like, hey, I've kind of messed up on all this stuff. And there's going to be a day where you're going to mess up on this stuff, but kind of having that understanding ahead of time is I would have loved it. I would have loved it. So, any other questions?
Yeah.
How do you manage to keep the motivation in the team when things are getting ugly and there is a lot of feedback coming and there is no time to do those things? And,
Booze.
or maybe you have to say something
Drinking.
difficult.
One, everyone should have a bottle of liquor by their desk, and it's true, everyone does. No, but seriously, what it is it's a team thing. It's totally a team thing. And a lot of that stuff, you'll notice that from studio to studio it changes, and show to show it changes. Sometimes you have a team that it's everyone's sad, and it really kind of comes down to the leadership. So if you're on a show, let's say, and everyone's getting really tough notes and really hard criticism from a tough director, the leadership in your department should be kind of rallying his troops and being like, everything's great, it's awesome, and like putting that veil over you to protect you as an artist and a delicate flower. Because at the end of the day, we're all delicate, super delicate flowers. But it's tough. It's very tough. And when the morale gets down, I always recommend getting out of the studio. Leave. Even if you know that you have like a super tight deadline, stand up and just walk out and just take a break. Just go away. Just take some time. Go sit in a park. Have a baguette. Anyone else?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey.
Hey.
So you were talking about recycling
Yeah.
simulations that you had.
Yeah.
So I noticed when you did the planet implosion, when you worked at Blur,
Yeah.
but you also worked on The Force Awakens, where there's also a planet implosion.
That is
So,
that's a topic I can't talk about.
Yeah, I know, but that's
Yeah.
so.
Looks
is
a
it
lot
ever,
alike, doesn't it?
Did it ever happen to you when a studio said, "Okay, but you did the simulation for us, but you also
Right.
did it for this other studio"?
Yeah.
Are there ever like legal problems? Like
I never take work out of a studio. It's not yours, it's the studio's. So you just never ever do that. It's terrible. You will always have to reinvent it when you go into the studio. It just kind of, it sucks. But one of the ways that you can kind of work around that is, so it depends on what software you use, but I tend to always build very strict and easy to use scenes. And I do it so many times, and so many times when I move studios, that it becomes second nature. So if I go to like ILM and I have to do a Spark setup, I've done it so many times that it's just like, the building of this stuff takes me 10, 20 minutes, right? But the iterative process is what takes longer. So yeah, it's tough because you're always rebuilding every studio that you go to, but a lot of times that studio will either have a tool in-house that does it just as well and or does it better. Like I said, also look to your neighbor. Don't be ashamed to just ask the really great effects artist down the alley to like, hey, can I borrow your tool? Like, can you show me how it works? And he'll always say yeah, and then you can work with him and be like, this is awesome. But remember, ego. Inflate his ego. Be like, yeah, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen. So he's not angry at you for using his stuff. Anyone else?
Okay, one last.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Cool. No worries.
Hi.
Yeah.
Thank you for all the true words. And how would you deal with a supervisor or agency who thinks they know things better than the director or the client?
Yeah.
That's a tough.
This also kind of harps back onto something. I've mentioned it a few times, but it's taken me 10 years to kind of become zen with this. It is not your product. It is not your art. At the end of the day, you are not the director. Your client is not like asking for you by name in a lot of senses. Some concept artists, they are. But you have to disconnect yourself from the ownership of things. So if, let's say, a client and a supervisor are arguing and you're getting conflicting notes, just hit the notes. Like, if one director says to do this, do it. If another one says to do something different, do it. Because it's not your problem.
Yeah, but what if the director says A and my supervisor, who is in the food chain right above me, says B?
You do B, because that's your supervisor. While he might be wrong, in the food chain, he is still who you should be listening to. And if at the end of the day he is the one that's wrong, it's not on you. You're taking orders. That's what you're doing. And it's a tough thing to navigate through.
Yeah, because criticizing this
I know.
can end bad.
Never criticize up. I know it's really, you can criticize up to your friends at lunch that you work with that are like on the same level, be like, that dude's a fucking idiot. Right? Like, all the time.
Yeah, but that happens every day.
Yes. Yeah. But just remember that there's things that your supervisor is dealing with that's larger than the artist is. So one of the things as a lead that's interesting is you have the entire project on your mind. Whereas you have that single shot on your mind, so you know everything about it. I know the rough sketch of everything, right? So while this director might be giving you different notes, the supervisor might have different ideas because it might work for the entire project. And you also don't know the communication that he might be having with a producer on the other end, or somebody else who's going, the director's a crazy guy, don't listen to him. but you still have to send the notes through. So you kind of have to filter it through the viewport of the supervisor, but at the end of the day, like if someone's telling you to do something and he's your boss, you got to kind of do it. And it sucks. And it does, but yeah, it's just the way the industry is, man. And I'm not saying that in a negative way. I don't want people to be like, oh, dude, I need to go into economics. It's still fun. You'll have some crazy people, but there's going to be those moments where it's like, this is so much fun. So, cool.
Thank you.
That's it? Cool.
Thank you very much.
All right, I hope you guys got some out of it.